This is Trash Talk with your host, Garrett the Trash Man.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Trash Talk. I'm Garrett the Trash Man. As usual, we got John. How you doing today, John?
I'm doing well. I'm excited.
Yeah, John and I have been talking about this podcast for a couple weeks now, and we're super excited because we've got Brandon Craig here with us. And we're really excited to have you, Brandon. So,
yeah, thank you.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing amazing.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's dive into the rants and get this going because I'm excited for it. So, John, I want to hear what's on your mind.
What is on my mind this morning is I had an experience with my oldest. She's 5 yesterday. And, it's just really present to me right now. Being a parent is the best. It's just, I love it. And we were sitting down having a conversation with her about, just the very basics of, being kind to others and, treating other people how you would want to be treated. And, I was just sitting there, experiencing it. And, it was just so fun to be with her. And, it's a very simple conversation, at a 5-year-old's level of, well, do you like it when people are mean to you? No. Okay, so do you think you should be nice to them? Yes. Okay, and, do you think, people will enjoy being around you if you're nice to them? Yeah. But it was funny to just, watch the wheels in her head spin as she was, processing it. And I was like, you know what? Being a parent's it's just fun. It's the bomb. And I don't know. That's what's present for me right now. Being a parent's the bomb. And I love it.
You know what that makes me think of?
What?
The other night when we were over at your place, and Titan did something to rile her up.
Oh.
And she's just welling on him with the pillow, and he's just laughing away. Yeah.
And it's just making her all the madder because he thinks it's funny.
Yeah, that was a good time. But
yeah.
I'd agree with you. Being a parent's pretty dang fun. All right. That all you got for today?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Short, sweet, and simple today.
All right, Brandon. Everyone wants to know what's on your mind.
Well, my mind's pretty empty. I'm happy to be with the two of you. And as I think about the opportunity to sit with each of you, I know each of you at a certain level. And it's just special. It's nice to be with you. And as we've been sitting here and I've been listening to John and, we talked a few minutes before this. What's present for me is just thinking about just what each of you guys are up to in your life and just what you're creating and what you're committed to and the things that matter to you. And it's inspiring, and it's a privilege to be sitting with you. That's what's present for me today.
Yeah, awesome. And likewise.
I'm not going to disagree with that. I'm pumped to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, in mine, what's on my mind goes right along with John as far as being a parent. But what I'm thinking of is how incredibly just important is a good night's rest. So we left the family at home last night, and we came down here to the valley. And so I don't have my family with me, and neither of my kids woke me up last night. And so I feel like $1,000,000. Slept all the way through I don't know the last time that happened. No one cried at midnight. Didn't have a 2 a.m. snack session, and I'm feeling fantastic. So that's what's on my mind is good sleep is great for quality of life. So right down that parent lane that you were going on. So yeah. Now that our minds are empty, like Brandon's, I hope we're clear to dive into this. Got what was on our mind off. I'm really excited to give a short introduction to you, and then we'll leave it up to you to really introduce yourself, how you'd like to be introduced. But I'd like to share with everyone just a little bit about how incredible it's been for me to get to know you and why I'm so excited about this podcast, Brandon. Because for me, You've been someone that has, I would say, the best way I could put it is like shown up for me. Anytime I've been with you, it's like you've been with me. And I know I'm saying not much there, but I'm really saying a lot. And that's been something that for me is absolutely incredible, because you being with me has changed the the trajectory of my life. And what's incredible to me is there was so much I didn't know before coming in contact with you and the work you do, that so many upgrades in my life that I wasn't even aware that were there. Um, and namely, what comes to my mind first is the relationship with my wife, which I would argue is probably the most important relationship in my life for sure, and I'd guess in anybody's life, is a relationship with their spouse. And it was so superficial for me before I was introduced to the work and what you do. And so if we can give anyone listening just a tiny little glimpse of that, for me would be so incredible, that someone through our podcast could have their life upgraded like you've been able to upgrade my life. So that's my little introduction. I wonder if John's got something to say to kind of introduce Brandon as well.
Yeah, I would say there's some similarities. Like, it's been incredible to have my eyes opened in so many ways to things I was asleep to, and like what that has done for like relationships with my wife, with my kids, how I parent. I think honestly what's been the biggest one is my relationship with myself has been completely, like, the dynamic has been completely flipped in a way that is like super powerful. And like the work you do and like what you guys teach is like, yeah, that's what it's results in. And so it's also the way I've experienced you as being committed to what you're committed to in life, like, inspires me in a way that I can't really put in language that would give it justice, but it's a way like I've experienced it in no other way in my life. And that right there, like, constantly is a reminder to myself of like, man, like, do I come to my life like that? Like, man, if I'm not, like, I got to, because there's just like any other way just doesn't seem worth it. Like, heck, let's go, let's get after it, you know? And so the experience that you've created for me of like being committed to what you're committed to is like mind blowing at times, in the sense that it makes me look at my own life and be like, man, I get so much more out of it. Like, there's so much that I could change and upgrade, and like, man, why wouldn't I go do it that way instead of the way I've been doing it? And so that's my 2 cents of a little bit of my experience with you, Brandon, and how impactful that's been for me. Like, I just love it. And so hopefully, you know, just you being you will be very useful to those listening today. I hope that that they can, you know, hear and experience things that will bring value to them, because like, obviously you've done it for the both of us, and that's why we've desired to do this and create this opportunity, and we really hope that it helps others. So
Yeah. And that being said, I would like to leave introducing yourself up to you, because you know you better than we know you. So I'd wonder if you would be willing to kind of introduce yourself, what you do, and then I'd love to hear your professional story of where you started professionally and what you used to do up to what you're doing currently. So wonder if we could have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for what you both have shared. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot to be said for the two of you. And, you know, just who you are in the world and what you are committed to and what you're committed to creating in your lives. And without that, we wouldn't be sitting here, right? So, so who am I? I'm a committed husband of 27 years and about 3 weeks. I'm a committed father of 5, and yeah, and other than that, I'm a creator. That's who I am. I move through the world with seeing the world as a possibility. Like, there's anything and everything is possible, and yeah, and I love that in my life. I love what creation is, and I'll probably say more about creation here in a few minutes, but what I would say in this moment is that we're all creators. Every person listening to this is a creator, and you guys are creators, and I'm a creator, and like you can't be a human being without being a creator. And it would be useful if one didn't know that. It'd be useful for them to discover that, because it could really have an impact on the way they experience their life. So, how far back would you like me to go when you ask about my professional journey?
So for us, I would like to see back to where it's like you first entered the workforce as what I would call professional, like not teenage working, but hey, like I'm building a life here.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, you didn't ask for the reason, but I'll give it. We really an intention with the listeners, and we've gotten feedback that that's what comes through is John and I are up to stuff in our life on purpose. We're up to stuff in our life, and at the same time, we saw out there in the podcast world there was a lot of gurus or experts, and we saw as our space of just sharing our experience, that we don't have the answers for our listeners, but we have our experience that there may be something for them to glean off of. So I would say early, like early 20s, entering into the workforce. I'm not sure what that looked like for you, but I think that would be a great place to start because many of our listeners are right there. And I've found as I read books or listen to stories of stuff, like I can really relate to someone that's in a position that looks like mine, where you look up and it's like, well, he can do that because his kids are raised, or he was able to do that because X, Y, or Z. And I think it's really useful to share stories of, hey, what was it like when you were having kids and you were professional and you were still intentionally creating in your life? There was no external circumstances that was stopping you from that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's great. So what comes to mind, Garrett, is when I was young, there was something that was said to me by my mother that had a particular impact, and I didn't really recognize it until later. In other words, it was something that I believed that sort of used me. I wasn't fully aware that it was using me. And the statement that she made, and I don't remember the circumstances of it, but it was certainly shared with me in this domain of like, what you're going to do in your life. And she said something like, if you want to be successful, you are going to have to be either a doctor or a dentist. And, somehow that penetrated me in a way that used me. And so as I moved through my life and I began going to college, it just occurred to me that what I would have to do is I would have to pick. I'm either going to be a doctor or dentist because, like who
Apparently that's the way it's got to be.
Yeah, and who doesn't, for me, I wanted to be successful. So I saw that as like, and again, what I would have everyone be thinking about isn't whether or not that's true, but what I would have them be thinking about is how something that gets said gets sort of metabolized in your mind, so to speak, in a way that it becomes a belief, and you may not even be present to it. And that's what that was for me. And so, I began going to university, and I declared that I wanted to be a dentist because for me, dentistry looked better than being a doctor. And, about 3 years into my undergrad, I discovered that I didn't have any interest in a big part of the nature of what I was learning in school, which, was the high-level biology and chemistry courses, and they didn't come easy for me, and it was a lot of work, and it wasn't enjoyable work. I didn't like it, and I also didn't like the structure of the university. I didn't it didn't really work for me the way they would test and grade on curves and, test you on things that they didn't teach you. And there was all kinds of things like that. So I got to a place where I made a decision to step away from school and really reevaluate what I was going to do. Now, I'm bringing this up. This is not exactly what you asked me to share, but I'm bringing it up because it's a very, very valuable part of what occurred in my process of getting to where I've gotten. During that time, I was working for a company called MCI. MCI was a long-distance telephone company. Most of the people listening probably don't even know that there used to be companies that just service long distance. Certainly pre-cell phone years, right? And I had this part-time, it was a 20-hour it was a perfect college job. I worked Monday through Thursday, 5 hours a night, 20 hours a week, and they gave us, an hourly wage, and then we could make commission off what we sold. And this is straight up telemarketing.
Yeah.
And my experience of telemarketing was like if you wanted to be successful, you just were. Like that's how it was for me. And I, at a young, early 20s, in college, working 20 hours a week, making a base hourly wage of $6. My annualized salary or compensation with bonuses, with the the performance pay from the sales was in the six figures.
With that 20 hours a week.
That's right.
Wow.
And that was sort of my introduction to this idea that a couple ideas. One is that you could get paid for performing. And what was so fascinating about that was that so we were in a center of 1,100 sales reps, and they were set up in bays. So you had like a team, and the team was 20 people. So you had a supervisor set in the middle, and you had 20 sales reps, and that was your team. And I was number one or number two every sales cycle, every quarter for several years out of 1,100 people. And the fascinating component for me was that the people in the bay, the other people, that like some of them were just happy to be there for the $6 an hour. So like they would put in their time and they would make their calls. We were on an auto dialer. We had headphones similar to what we're wearing here, and you're just on the phone, and your goal was to get somebody to switch from whatever long distance phone company they were on, which was probably AT&T, to MCI. Super low entry, very low impact on people's lives, but yet you had to get them to listen and say yes.
Yeah.
And I had people on my team who, literally couldn't get a sale all night for 5 hours. They would sit there and talk to hundreds of people, and they couldn't get somebody to say yes. And I could be sitting right next to them, and I'm getting served up the same people, and I could get yeses. And it was just something to learn from. The other thing that I learned about this environment was that there was something called sales. So in other words, I didn't grow up knowing anything about sales. I'd never been in a sales environment. I knew very, very little about this idea of selling. But in this role, in this company, as I was using this as a college job, I had this experience of discovering what was possible in what sales was like. You know, in short order, all I would say in this moment is that, sales is really about relating. It's really about being with another person in a way that they can see things similarly to the way you see them. And vice versa, so that when the two of you can come together, like, it either makes sense or it doesn't make sense, and if it does, they say yes and you move on, and if it doesn't, they say no and you see it too and you move on.
Mm-hmm.
So, so when I decided to take a break and sort of reevaluate from school, I had this job at MCI, and so I was able to, justify. I was paying for my own college, and my wife and I at this point, we had one little baby, and we had bought our first house, and it was a big accomplishment, and all of our friends were attempting to do that as well, or we were doing well.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that most people can relate to what I mean by that. Like, you have your group of friends that you've kind of grown up with, and you're able to kind of gauge, like, oh, well, they're in an apartment, they bought a condo, that's great. Oh, and we bought a house,
Mm-hmm.
like a decent house with a pool, and for me, it wasn't like about the thing called a house or the pool or whatever. It was about this idea that, yeah, you could create things, like,
Yeah.
you like this thing over here called a job. How I interact with that job, how I relate to that job, how I perform in that job creates something over here called money. Oh, I can take that money and I can come over here and I can create something with that called a house. And and so through that process, as we look at my my career trajectory, so to speak, I gained a love of selling, and I discovered that I was pretty effective at selling. Never had a desire to become like a professional salesperson. But out of that experience at MCI, I had a reputation for being effective, and there was a former president of AT&T Wireless who had done enough research and had discovered who I was, and he had gone to work for a local company here in Arizona called Cuma Learning, and Cuma was a uh, performance training company for corporations, and so this guy recruited me to come look at this company, and the whole purpose of what they were looking for was some younger talent. So I came and interviewed at this company. I had no idea what I was interviewing for, but it was closer to my house, and it looked like something different. And of course, like anyone, when somebody wants you, it feels good, and you
Mm-hmm.
think, well, like, this could be a great opportunity. So, and I was looking for the possibility of something full time, knowing that I did not intend to go back to school. And so I created a relationship with this company. And their focus was younger talent, because I joined a sales team, had 12 other sales reps, and at the time I was 24. And the next oldest sales rep was 49, which doesn't seem that old now, but back then it seemed like, whoa. And then the others were older. They went into their late 50s and 60s, and these guys were wearing suits and penny loafers and stuff to work, right?
Uh-huh.
And this was the first job I had where you dressed up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're selling MCI long distance on the telephone. Doesn't matter what you wear.
You can be in
Right.
gym shorts, doesn't matter.
Yeah, but this job was about calling on CEOs of companies that had at least 500 employees. So it gives you kind of a sense. Like, that's a bit of a change
Mhm.
in environment.
Yeah, just a little.
Little bit different than calling grandma on the phone. And
Yeah. Yeah, interrupting somebody at dinner,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what I discovered. So one of the things that they were really after, what they were looking for when they said they wanted younger talent, I think part of what they wanted was energy, but another part of what they wanted was somebody that didn't have a bunch of stories about how it was. And I didn't have that. I grew up in rural Gilbert, Arizona. I didn't know much about the corporate environment. I didn't know much about selling, outside of what I had done at this point, and what they got was exactly that. Like, I came in and they said, then they hired me. We created a formal agreement together, and this was a big jump from $6 an hour. When,
I would imagine.
yeah. Got a base salary now with a commission opportunity, and it took about 3 months or so, and I was their top performer. And within 6 months, I had I was over double the person underneath me. And now it's easier to look back and see. I wasn't as experienced, or you could say as intelligent about the situation back then as I am now, as I look backwards. But what was so valuable for me was I didn't have a story about how it was supposed to go.
I do have a quick question. Stemming back to what your mother told you that was very impactful of, you got to be a dentist or a doctor to be, was it successful, she said?
That's right.
Like, I'm going to probably guess that story was changing in your mind significantly at this point in time of your life.
Yeah, I began to question that story sometime before that, for sure. Yeah.
So you're rewriting what you had believed before just because it had been told to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and discover that it was there. Yeah, I think that's an important thing here, is that so since then, we'll get to some of what the work that I do is now here in a moment, but the work that I do now introduces me to people who are who I could have been if I didn't question that. I'm thinking of one in particular that I just met with recently, who's, very successful endodontist, root canal doctor, has his own practice with a couple partners, very extraordinary guy. And, he's in his early 50s. He's, just in the last few years got all his student debt paid for, the 8 or 9 years that he went to school, and the business debt to get everything going. And he's like making money, he's made money up to this point, but now he's making money in a way that, like, it's sticking around. It's like, wow, there's, sort of what he's been working hard to produce. And he absolutely doesn't love what he does. Like, he's, and when I'm with him, I discover that, and he discovers that, like, and he feels super stuck in it. Like, he's committed his life to it. And, look, that doesn't mean anything. Like, it just means what it means. But it's important, I think, that people recognize in this conversation, that whoever's listening, I think it's important that they recognize that there are things that could be running you. And, this is an example of that. My mom saying, if you want to be successful, you got to be a doctor or dentist. The thing to know is that I think if you were to go question my mom about that, she wouldn't stand on that. That was a moment in time. That was some moment in time
that was mentioned.
Yeah, it was mentioned. But how I heard it at whatever age I was, it stuck. It was like, I recorded that. Like, oh yeah, that's important to me. And so, yeah, there was a point at which I began to question that, and and that questioning is what opened up the possibility of doing some other things and discovering, and again, like, it's not like I felt like I wanted to be a salesman for the rest of my life. This was an opportunity that opened up, and I jumped in it. But there was something there that happened, I began mentioning some of my success. I hope people hear that, not like me talking about me and what I accomplished. I want people to hear the success like, it's just possible to step into something and never have done it, never have called on CEOs of companies of 500 employees or more, and yet be able to navigate that environment, adapt to it, and, discover success in that. Get meetings and sit down and not have all the answers. I mean, I'm sitting in front of established leaders that are running companies, and I'm telling them about a company that I just don't really know a lot about, but I believe in. Enough has been done that I believe in it. And I'm able to create enough connection to get the traction to produce customers. And the service that company primarily produced was they would bring a presenter in, and they would speak to a part of the company or the whole company, depending on what they're wanting to accomplish, and they would train them and teach them in a one-to-many format. And at that time, so this is in the mid 90s, early to mid 90s, it was a $40,000 day. That's how we created our pricing. It's like, well, you got 500 employees, we can do 100 at a time, or 200 at a time, or let's say 250 at a time. So we need 2 sessions, so we need 2 days. So $40,000 a day times 2, it's an $80,000 agreement.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was selling. So I would, I wanted to give you guys an idea. Like, I'm asking for $40,000 a day to sell a person that's going to go stand on a stage and teach a company, teach their employees. Now, the purpose of this was to, further whatever was happening in the company. A lot of times there was cultural issues or whatever. So, but look, I paint all this because I want people to understand one of the most impactful learnings that I got out of that experience. As I would work with these leaders, and I'd be introduced to some of their middle management leaders and their executives, and I would sit with them and talk through kind of what they wanted, and I developed relationships with a lot of these people, and I did so intentionally. In fact, one of the things that I found myself often doing was sitting at dinner around their table in their home on a weekend. Just and I would create that. Like, I would produce it so that I could be around people who were successful and just be in the study of it. And what came out of this whole experience was that I became really fascinated with the outcome that I would see, or that I would experience myself. In other words, we could take 2 of these leaders from the same company, and they could sit in the same room, listen to the same presentation, go through the same training, and then after all of that, I'd go, interact with them, sit with them. Hey, how was it for you? How was, how do you feel like your people received it? What do you see in it? And I mean, literally could have these 2 leaders sitting next to each other in the same room, go through the same training, come out of it, talk to each of them individually, and one of them says, yeah, it was good. It was cool. I liked it. It'll be useful. And then I could talk to the other one, and they say, my life's never going to be the same. Like, I'm taking a 90-degree turn, man, and I'm never going back there. And this is what's going to happen. And I became really fascinated with that concept, that you could have 2 people in the same room experience the same thing and experience it so differently. And I became really a student of that, just studying and learning. And keep in mind, I'm just selling. I'm just selling a service and a product. And so I did that for a few years, really discovered a lot about people. I realized that those leaders they put their pants on just like we do. They they struggle with things just like you or I do. They may be running a big company and they don't have it all together often. Sometimes they've got trouble at home. Like there was like a real education for a early 20s guy who was driven. I wanted to be successful. And so I left that company thinking that my next step in my career was I wanted to go manage people. Now I've got this, experience, and I've been able to be in some of the training, and I've watched, people's lives change, and that's certainly, that's pretty special to be a part of. Now I want to go, run a company. So I went and created myself into a company that was completely different. This company was a skilled labor staffing company.
Okay.
So if you think about temporary staffing, this company, it's a national company. They had an Arizona presence, and I interviewed to run Arizona for them.
Mhm.
And at this time, they had about 160 employees. And my the thing that I would have everyone be open to was that one of the very first qualifications that were required was a 4-year degree.
Like a lot of jobs.
Yeah. And if you have been listening, you know that I dropped out of college when I was, in my junior year. And so, like, when we talk about creation, something's got to be created here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went and had the interview. And, of course, I didn't lie saying that I had a 4-year degree. But I was very clear with the hiring leader, this regional manager that had flown in to interview me and a few others. And, he saw the value in what I would bring to the business. And, I had to be a part of that. I had to be able to represent myself accurately and adequately. And so, So Gary Brown hired me, and look, it was fun. It's fun. I don't know how much is what I'm sharing useful or
Yeah, very useful. I
Yeah.
believe. Yeah.
yeah.
You're
Okay.
doing great.
So, so I remember going through that interview process. Now, look, I hadn't had a ton of experience interviewing.
Mm-hmm. Guess be like third time maybe.
That's right, and I was very intentional about looking for something different. So, this time this didn't find me. I went out. I had to find it.
And with that, was it similar to like when you dropped out of school? Like you're like, this something's not working for me here, or what did that look like?
That's right.
Had you being intentional about that?
That's a great question. I love your perceptiveness, Garrett. So, it almost exactly that when I was working at Cuma Learning, doing what I was doing, there was just a point in time where it just no longer aligned for me. I just felt it was time to move on. And I don't know where that came from. It just came. And I listened to it just like I listened to what was coming, out of me in college. And I'm grateful that I listened to that. Because what I'm clear about is I left the job where I was, in a certain sense, a bit of a top dog. I had produced a really great living for myself. At mid-20s, I was, well into the six figures. I was...
Well, talking like you did, you probably could look around your friend group.
Oh, yeah.
And it was like this, I'm set.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I had a few friends that were actually working there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was making 3-4 times more money than they were at times with commission and such. So yes, and it just got to a place where I felt called forward, like it's time to do something else. And so I went out and intentionally looked at what I could do, thought I wanted to manage people, had this interview with Gary Brown. And, Gary could see that there was something over there with me. And, I know I had something to do with that. I had to show up. I had to represent myself. And I hit the idea that I didn't have a degree. I hit it right between the eyes. It's just like, look, I don't want to mislead you. I'm really clear what your qualifications are here, what you're looking for. And he continued to have the interview with me, and we got to a point in the interview where he said, "Look, I really would love to hire you, but I cannot hire you with you not having a degree." And he goes, and I said, "Well, who can? Who could do that?" And he goes, "Well, it would be our vice president of sales. He would be the one that could approve that." And I said, "Well, what would we need to do with him?" And he said, "That's a great question. Why don't you step out of the office and let me call him?" And so he did. He called him, and which resulted in him calling me back in after a few minutes. And I had a conversation with this guy, same as Brian. And Brian, asked me a bunch of questions, and we talked. And certainly Gary was advocating for me, and ultimately resulted in me getting the job. And I got to experience what it was to run a company with people. I thought I wanted to lead people, so that's what I got. And I did well there, but I discovered that there were elements about that business that I didn't like. So I was there for a few years, but we turned the branch around. We were able to become one of their top producers in the nation, and I sort of accomplished what I wanted to. But I got really clear at a certain point that just did not really align for me, and I left there. Went to work for a .com company. Discovered very quickly that that's a very volatile world, at least at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And by this time we're in the early 2000s, and I thought what I wanted was that corporate sales role, that VP of sales. I thought what I wanted was a bunch of stock options and the technology environment, and that's what I got. But what I also got was to become a casualty of the .com bubble in the early 2000s, which found myself without a job. And what I had done early, so you can imagine where I was. By this point, I had, I think we were on our third house, and we'd kept the first two to rent out and generate some long-term investment income. And what I didn't share that would be important for people to know is when I first moved into our first house, one of the things that we discovered is that we needed a pool fence. So I mentioned that I bought a home, had a pool. It's a big deal for us, and it needed a pool fence. It needed a pool fence because my wife had a baby, and she was adamant that this baby's not going to drown in that pool. And so I'd gone out, looked at what it would cost to have somebody come in and do it, and it seemed like it was a lot of money. And so I had met the neighbor next to me that we'd just moved in and become friends. And this guy, I told him what I needed and asked him if he knew anybody. He goes, "No, but I got a welder here. If you want to use it, you're welcome to use it." And so that got me thinking, well, maybe I'll build my own pool fence. And so I sourced the material and made a decision to do that. And it was a project. It was something that I thought would be fun to do, but also wanted to save some money.
Yeah.
Young, married, every dollar counts, right? And so I, it's not like I knew how to do it, but I knew I could do it, and I knew I'd figure it out as I went. And so I borrowed my neighbor's welder, borrowed a couple other things from some other people, and turned my little garage into a little metal shop for a few weeks on nights and weekends, and I got to a place where I had created this pool fence. And then I decided, well, look, I want to put a gate on the side of my house because I had a trailer and I wanted to be able to back the trailer in behind, and it didn't have a gate big enough for that. So I my neighbor was like, yeah, no problem, use my welder again. So I did that. Well, what I didn't recognize was that became a bit of a billboard, an advertisement, because the other homes in the neighborhood, didn't have updated gates. And the gate I put on there updated the house, looked good, was a different style, it was all metal and had wood and slats, and all the other gates around that were original were just like flimsy wood gates. So what came out of that were people asking me, hey, where'd you get your gate? Like, we've been thinking about that. We want to get one of those. Well, look, I'm an entrepreneur. I didn't know I was an entrepreneur, but like that sort of exposed entrepreneurship to me, because I'm looking at that like, oh, you want a gate? Well, like, I know how to do that, and I know what it cost. I also know what it would cost a person to go buy one. And I'm doing the math. It doesn't take long to do that math. It's like, there's profit in there. I could save them a little money. And
Light bulb.
yeah, so that was, my little beginning stages of entrepreneurship was, yeah, I'm just going to help a few neighbors out.
Yeah.
And
make a little bit of money.
Yeah, make a little bit of money, and also, like, I really loved working with my hands. Love, some of the, just the physical component of it. Sitting in an office wasn't like everything to me. And so, so I began doing a few of these, and yeah, I enjoyed it. And then it started to click, like, oh, wait, like, there's gates opportunities everywhere. You drive from where I live to my office, and I'm seeing like hundreds of opportunities. And so I made a couple of phone calls, and I, talked to some people in the business of, block walls and custom home building, and people that I knew or people that I was introduced to because I asked to be introduced to, and I sort of started doing a little market research, you could say. And what I came to the conclusion of is like, hey, there's an opportunity here. And so I thanked my neighbor for his welder, and I went and bought my own, and I went and bought a few more tools. I remember when I did it, my wife was like, are you sure, like, you want to do this? And, the way I did it was, I went and sold some jobs, and I put this equipment on a credit card. And I remember the credit card had a $5,000 maximum limit. I was absolutely not an advocate of going in debt, and the idea of paying payments on a credit card didn't work for me. But I didn't have the cash at this point. This is like pretty early on. And so I decided to put it on a credit card, and then I just went to work. And when that bill came, I think I spent about $4,600 on the credit card. And when that first bill came for the credit card, I had made enough money or collected enough money to pay it.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of me developing a company that I just consider to be a bit of a side business. So when I went to work for Cuma Learning, I was very upfront with them that I had this little side business and that it wouldn't impact my ability to perform here. But I didn't want to not disclose it to them because, like if I wanted to take a phone call from a potential customer or something, I wanted to be able to do that and not have a conflict. So I was upfront, but I was intentional about creating the relationship in a way that worked, and they were willing to do that. And then I hired, a couple of young guys, 17, 18 years old, taught them how to weld. And so I had 1 to 2 employees that were just doing this work, and then at night or mostly on the weekends, I would, go install stuff and all of that. And I really enjoyed it. And it was cash money. It was just like play money.
Yeah.
So if we go back and we fast forward to about mid-December of 2000, I got laid off from a .com company, and I'm driving home. It's one of those nights that I'll never forget. It was about 6 p.m. It's a little drizzly outside, which doesn't rain in Arizona much. So like it's kind of like stuck in my mind, right?
Yeah.
It's implanted in there. And I remember having to make a phone call to my wife and tell her that I just got laid off, that I no longer have a job, which means like I don't have a salary coming in, I don't have commissions coming in, and we've got all these properties, and we were just finishing up building a home, and I made that phone call to her, and she responded differently than I anticipated she would. And what she said to me was, and this is one of those moments where, I think we probably all can look back and we can see moments in our life where we just, something happens and we have a shift. And this was one of those moments where she was a creator and she shifted what I saw. And I don't know if she meant to do that or if it's just who she was or both. But she said to me, she said, "Hey, so what are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to call my recruiter that's put me in this job, and I'm going to let him know that, we need to find something else." And she said, "Yeah, how much did you enjoy what you were doing?" And I said, "I didn't really enjoy this last gig at all. Like, I didn't like it at all. We're going to have to get, more intentional about what we get next time."
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Yeah, I could tell." And she said, why don't you go build up your gate business?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" She goes, "Well, why don't you just go do that full time?" And she said, "I've watched you build, multi-million-dollar sales organizations for a few different companies, and like you've been successful. Like, why don't you just do your own company?" And it hadn't occurred to me to do that. And it looked like a big stretch, to go from a salary and at that point in time, I had a couple of teenagers working for me, and they were awesome, and they'd show up and do what we needed to get done, and I'd pick up the pieces here and there, and there was money to pay them and money to pay for the bills, and we had the equipment paid for, and but we were doing all of this out of our little 2-car garage in our house in Mesa. Like, we keep the door closed so we didn't bother the neighbors, and she said to me, she said, "Honey, like, I want you to be happy. And I experience you being happy when you're doing that work. Like, you just seem to really love it." And I said, "I do love it, but babe, like we got a house over here that's like very expensive, and we got all this other stuff." She goes, "Listen, I don't care about all that stuff. Like, that stuff will come when it's time." She said, "If we need to move back into one of our other houses and sell the others, like, I'm willing to do that." Now, at this point, we had three kids,
Mm-hmm.
3 young boys, and what felt like to me as a father is a lot of responsibility. And yeah, so I really thought about it. I spent the last 2 weeks of that year crunching numbers like every which way you can imagine. I probably had 20 spreadsheets of like basically how many gates would I have to make my mortgage? How many gates would I have to make? If I hired 2 more people, what would that cost? I just started really playing with it, and also recognizing that I couldn't do it in my 2-car garage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'd already pushed the envelope on that. That's a whole nother story. Lots of creation there with the town of Mesa and the neighbors, and there's a lot there that we've navigated.
Uh-huh.
And so I saw a pathway forward, and I felt compelled to move in that direction. And and I didn't have all those answers that you would think one would need to run that business.
Mm-hmm.
I might have known how to sell, but I didn't know how. I mean, go sell a product you don't know a lot about. I'd been doing some gates. Now I've got to do more than that. Like, I've got to create some way to manufacture more than that, because I'm not going to make enough money just doing that.
Yeah.
And so, I found myself out in the middle of projects, walking them. There's one in particular that I did with a guy named Barry Halstead, who was so gracious in giving me a chance. And I remember we're in this really astute community. It's called Tapestry Canyon. It's hidden. Most people don't even know it exists in the valley. It's it's behind South Mountain and it's surrounded by mountains, and you can only get in one way, and it's gated and guard gated. And he was building a home in there, and he allowed me to meet with him to give him a proposal on all the ironwork on this house. And I remember as I was walking the property, he's like, yeah, and I want to do a fence right here, and I want it to follow this wall like this, and and I'm just like, but inside I'm like, is that possible?
Does metal
Like,
bend like that?
yeah, like how's that? Like, I think I've seen that before, but I don't know how. Like, and he's like, can you do that? And I'm like, yeah. And I got all the measurements that I could get. Not even really knowing how to measure it, but got what I thought I needed, and I went back to my little office. By this point, I was leasing a place, and I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. And I did by just making phone calls and talking with people and going and looking at products and figuring out what company did what. I see some product, I'm like, what company did that? And then I call that company and say, hey, can I come by and meet you? And hundreds of visits over time. Like, and in this particular situation, the information that I got was like, yeah, you just build the panels, and then you just bend them around something. And I'm like, okay. So I did that, and what I got was a product that fit, but you can imagine if you're bending it around something, it can kink. And so this product had kinks in it as it went around. So and we'd done a bunch of work on this house. It wasn't just that. We did some neat skylight grills that I'd never even thought about that, like we did. And it's like, wow, you just sit and look at something for a while, and you measure it out. You take one step at a time. You can figure it out. And so I remember walking the job with him when it was complete. And, we were walking it to, get a sign off so we could get paid. And he says to me, hey, let's take a look over here, and I said, okay, and I'm like, oh, shoot, like, here we go. And he walks over to the products, and he's like, so look, this looks good, follows the wall, but like it's got kinks in it. He says, I don't think my homeowner's going to like that. And at the time, like, I didn't know what else to do. And so I said, well, look, you said you wanted it to follow this. It's metal. I mean, you bend it, it's going to kink. Like, if there's a place that we need to touch up or whatever, like, we can. He goes, well, no, you're right. Like, I get that. So he said, okay, I just wish there were less kinks. I said, well, build walls that don't have as many bends. And he goes, yeah, that's a good point. So he sort of like subscribed to what I understood at that time.
Well, he's probably looking at you like an expert.
Yeah.
Which has been my experience. Like, people look at me as an expert, and it's like I just go try to figure it out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the way that went, and I recognized that, boy, there's got to be a better way to do that. And so as I grew my company, and by the way, like, when I decided to step into it, it's a big decision. I hope I've communicated that in a way people can hear it. Like, it's a big life change to go from working for somebody to working for yourself, and then, working for yourself and developing a company that you don't know a ton about. One of the things that were critical to me is, like, if I'm going to build this company, there's a point at every company stage where what you're looking to do is survive. I got to prove this out, and I just got to survive. And I believe that would come pretty quickly. And it wasn't like I, had an easy pathway to survival. But, like, for me, if I'm going to step into it, I'm going to do it in a way that, like, it's going to make sense and it's going to work. And what I knew I wanted to produce was a company that I could sell someday. Not that I would sell it, but my intelligence and my experience basically had me focus on, I want to put things in place so that this company necessarily depend on me,
Mhm.
and I didn't want to be strapped to it. I loved it, and I didn't know that I saw my whole future doing it. And yet at the same time, like, I didn't see myself doing anything other than that.
Mhm.
And so, as I would grow, I would grow with this idea that I was building something that needed to stand on its own. And so I would invest in equipment, and I would look to minimize debt on that equipment. Oftentimes I'd pay cash for that equipment, and always looking to expand the services of the business and grow it in a way that it was diversified into many markets. It wasn't just a gate company.
Mhm.
And I realized a lot of success in that company by using that mentality. And so, look, I want to just pause for a moment. Is there any thoughts about what I've shared, or any questions that you have, or have I said more about that than I ought to?
I don't think so, and I love it because there's so often I think business owners, and you've spoke to it a couple times, business owners or executives or people that people might look at and say, hey, I want to emulate that. They put their pants on the same way, and my experience as I've been running a company has been the way I heard it. My experience has been similar. Of like, there's so much of just like go figure it out or go create it. Like there's not it's not like you become a CEO or you open up your own company and this like knowledge is endowed on you. It's like, oh yeah, like I can just see exactly what I've got to go do. It's like there's just work to create what you want to create, and I think especially in the way you're sharing it, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on the edge of my seat waiting to hear what's next.
I do want to ask you about something. So, and this is just what I've experienced so far. It sounds like, going into work with the sales performance company, you seemed pretty confident in that. And then going in and managing there to own a division of that other company. And then even the .com company, you seemed like, yeah, I can go do this. Was there a little more work and reconciliation you had to do mentally to go ham on your metalworks business? Like, was there more of like a, can I do that? And like, did you? I guess I want to ask specifically is it's like, it seems like you weren't like really worried about doing all those other jobs, and it seems like you were a little more worried about starting your own company, and like that mental work of like going out on your own and not having a corporate blanket. How did you reconcile that?
Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question, a great observation. I don't know that it was easy in any of the decision points I've shared. Like, I think there was work to do in all of them, but there's certainly the depth of work required for me at that time in my life was pretty big, to go from no salary and no compensation structure that someone else is sort of responsible for providing the foundation for. And again, there's always been a bit of a pay for performance mentality, so I'm okay with that part. Like, I'm adjusted to that. But then, like, to go like, okay, now it's 100%. Yeah, that's a big decision. Especially my responsibilities were growing as we were going down this line. So, at this point, 3 little boys and, wife and, two newer cars and houses and so forth. So, like, yeah, I mean, it was a big decision. The component or the element that I would focus on to share would be the element of faith. Having a belief in something that you can't see. Like, you can visualize it and it does not yet exist. And to have faith that it could was absolutely critical for me.
That's awesome.
It's something that sticks out to me that we could spend hours on, I'm sure, discussing, but I think better I would just like everyone listening to look at and look at it in their life is a portion. You talked about your wife and what she shared with you on your way home, and the discussion you had and the impact that that conversation had. And what I want to point at is there's a portion of it of like who your wife is, which I know a little bit. I don't know her well, but like obviously there's a portion of that, and then also another portion that I think would be the most useful to look at is who you'd been for your wife and with your wife that had her say that to you in such a confident way.
Yeah.
Like that, because so easy that could be a completely different conversation of someone that is like, man, my world's just been torn apart, not I've got faith in you and go do what makes you happy. So
Amen to that.
like-
I'm going to 100% agree. That is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And like I said, I think that's something we could spend hours on talking about. And I want to just say, like, I think that's something worth looking at to our listeners and to myself.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you brought that up. So, I've taken on a relationship with my wife. We got married young, and she filled a place for me in my life that I see as equal in the sense that like what she thinks and what she says matters to me, and that's the place that I began operating from the first point at which we met and how we got married and so forth. And she's extraordinary. I think we take for granted at times how our partners who are close to us can see things in us that we may not be able to see in ourselves. And sometimes what they see is things that aren't useful, and sometimes they see things that are useful. And in this case, she really opened my eyes to the possibility of me doing something that I did enjoy, I did love, and making a big move to do it. And the other side of that was that she was fully behind me. And that's not to say that she didn't have concerns and that she didn't have fears to reconcile. It's not like she, just making the decision, like it didn't matter. I mean, she had concerns. I mean, we had groceries to buy.
Yeah.
Well,
and I can hear in what you like the story. Like there was this a mindset of abundance and faith of this possibility out there, and then you also shared this, this risk that was taken, but the mitigation or the work that was put in, like these spreadsheets that you built of like what does this look like? I'm not blindly like just faith jumping out the window, but I looked at what the risk would be and how I'd mitigate that, what it would look like to create success. And so like it all occurs to me as so responsible and being so open to the possibility of what can be created.
Yeah. Yeah, and like what I can tell you is that knowing what I know today, that decision would likely be made differently. Meaning, not that I did anything that I wouldn't do again. It's that I just could only make that decision with the experience I had. And there's a bit of irony in it, in that like I had no idea how to run that company or even how to build it. I mean, I knew how to sell, and I knew how to make the products at least at a base level. I knew that products could be made. I could see products out in the world that were made. It didn't mean I knew how to make them, but I think the component is that I knew I could discover a way to do it, and that I may not know that way right now. And there's and those spreadsheets and a lot of that was just getting myself to a place of seeing some pathway.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is it possible? You know, how many of these products, of this exact product, would I have to sell and make in a month to just break even?
Mm-hmm.
And look, I don't have a recollection of ever not doing at least that. You know, it's not like I had to go to the bank and get a loan and I lived in debt for a while and I had negative cash flow. No, like I was able to figure it out. And I'll tell you, it came with a lot of hard work. Like there were, you know, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, you know, going out and working in the shop and welding and grinding and cutting and, you know, installing and going back and taking a shower at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and then going and meeting with, you know, potential clients and selling jobs and, you know, getting home at 6:30, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And I mean, there were a lot of days like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the other thing I would say, sort of back to what you were talking about, Garrett, is I think often we underestimate or misjudge, or in many ways we don't even see the value of what it is to have a partner that's behind you. And you know, it's touching, it's emotional for me because man, when my wife's behind me, like I can walk through block walls, man. You can't stop me. And if we're ever like not in sync, like I feel the opposite. You know, like things become very difficult. And I think as partners, we misinterpret and misunderstand the power we have to be behind our partner as the person that, you know, like, look, if you have a partner that's not behind you, the thing to do is not to focus on that. The thing to do is to figure out how you can be a partner that's behind them, and demonstrate and give them an experience of what it is to be in a partnership where, you know, where you're supported. And my wife was behind me. She trusted that I would figure it out. Here's the other thing. She had no idea what she was saying.
Yeah.
Like, you know, she in her world has her ideas. I mean, she was the most incredible mother, the best mother on the planet. Still to this day, there's nobody that could be better than her as a mother. As a young stay-at-home mom with, you know, 3 kids in diapers, what I can tell you is she knew her domain, and she really had no idea what was happening out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she knew what I told her, and even then, she just heard it however she heard it. It didn't mean she heard it the way I was telling her.
Yeah.
And but she could see things in me that I didn't necessarily see in me, and she could call those forth in her support.
That's a
Yes.
great experience when that happens. Like it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
I can relate, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So I built this company, and I had an experience along the pathway of building it. Now, of course, you bring with you all your experience, and one of the things that was critical for me when I was deciding to build this company and as I was doing it was I wanted to produce a culture that had people want to work there.
Mm-hmm.
I was very committed to, you know, getting the right kind of workers and people that could help me. You know, it was at one point it was survival, and then, you know, at another point it became about building
Mm-hmm.
and developing and how to scale and become more effective. And between my relationships within the company, my relationships in the market space, so the vendors and the clients, I developed a reputation for being a successful business owner.
Mm-hmm.
And with that came, you know, relationships of people wanting to spend time with me. And, I'd get a phone call from someone who says, "Hey, you know, I wonder if I could take you to lunch. I want to pick your brain." And you know, look, those didn't last long for me. And I realized that, like, if I'm going to spend time with somebody, I'm going to do it intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And And so I began, this is probably, 2005, 2006 area. I decided that if I'm going to spend time with people, I'm going to do it intentionally. And what that looks like is, they're going to come to my office and I'm going to close the door. They're going to be there on time and we're going to have a real conversation together. And I really developed a love for conversation. But I also became clear about what's possible in a conversation. And what that meant was that, by eliminating a lot of those distractions, by creating the space in a way that when a person showed up, like we could really be together. I observed the outcomes and the impact from that, and it was incredible. Like the conversations really moved people, and a lot of times it was just like, hey, how do you do this in your business, or how do you get this, or how do you stay as busy as you are, or whatever. And then as we sort of fast forward, in the end of 2007, November 2007, there was this little thing called the mortgage crisis.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody knows anything about that, which sort of really kicked off a recession in 2008. And me being a company that was focused on new construction in the residential and commercial and industrial markets, we felt it, and it was impactful. And we had to take all the things I had learned and really get to the heart of performance and relationships, and the outcome of all that is that there was a point in time where I discovered that I was having a lot more fulfillment and satisfaction out of those conversations I was having with those business leaders than I was running the company. And I felt called to sell the company. And so I did that. I sold the company, and I created a formal coaching practice. And the coaching practice was designed to create leaders. And it was a high fee, high entry, like, if you want to work with me, you're going to spend a chunk of money up front. We're going to work together for a year. We're going to be together weekly, and we're going to be in a conversation. And it took me about 6 months to produce a full coaching practice. And most of the people around me, my friends, and they're like, dude, you're crazy. Like, nobody's going to come pay you to talk to you. But I saw a vision of it. And, maybe at some point in the future we could talk more about it. But given the nature of where I'd been, what I'd done, what I was clear about, and what was coming out of those experiences, I just became just infatuated with and in love with the possibility of what's sitting over there in your chair and in your chair and in the chair of every person listening. And I have not stopped since. And, the firm Ontacore was designed and developed around helping people become connected to their power and produce performance in their life as a leader. Leader of their life, leader of companies, leader in relationships. And so, the firm is, this work that I've done in the firm, I've been doing it now for, 14 years or so, 15 years, and love every minute of it. And it's how we have the relationship we have. The two of you in your own ways have found yourself in a leadership course that we do for the public once or twice a year called the Create Powerful course. That's how we met. And then both of you have furthered your learning through some formal agreements that we've created together. And so I know you have a good sense of what we do. Mm-hmm. The nature of what we do is get to the heart of who you are as a person and what's at your core and the opportunity that exists when you can discover it. Very similarly to what I said about my mom. Yeah. Hey, if you want to be successful, you got to be a doctor or a dentist. Well, you got a lot of those things going on. Mm-hmm. And they're some of them are really useful, and some of them are really costly.
Yeah. Well, I love how you put it. It ran you.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. Well, we'll wrap this up, and I really appreciate what you've shared, who you've been for me, just everything. It's been great to be with you today, and I want to encourage people too, because John and I, we've spoke about Entrecore as we go, because it's such a part of our life. It's impossible in our conversation for it not to come up. And I think we've shared it before, but it's Entrecore.com if someone was really interested in what you had to say, where they could discover more of what you do currently, and if, say, for the Create Powerful course, if they wanted to see a possibility of them going to that's where they'd go, correct? Entrecore.com?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
ONTOCORE.com.
Right.
And the message that I would love to leave your listeners is that, look, you have a possibility that exists in you, and it's great. Whatever you've done, whoever you are in it, it's wonderful. But what has generated your life is who you're being in your life. And if you could slow down and get connected to who you're being, you would discover that there's a possibility in being more effective, in being more loving, in being a better partner, in being more patient, and you can fill in the blank. Like there's and it results in being successful in your relationships, being successful in your professional endeavors. But that stuff, the professional stuff's kind of small, really. I mean, it's look, our firm, we work with CEOs and executives. We produce billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars in revenue out of our work. And that's great. But that's super small compared to the real impact. The real impact, and you guys have both spoken to, the real impact is in the everyday living of your life. What is the quality of the everyday living of your life? The quality of your relationships at home, or with your children, or with your spouse, or your parents, or and yourself. What is the quality? And look, if we're going to be in a conversation, we're going to get right to the heart of that, because that's where the gold is. And the message I would just have people really look to discover for themselves is what's possible when you begin to occur for yourself as a creator, as a leader, and you operate from that place.
I hope everybody can slow themselves down enough to hear that question, because there's a lot of useful things can stem from asking yourself that question. Because I've asked myself that question quite a few times in the last about year, and it's been very useful for me. So I know it'd be useful for them in their own way.
Well, thank you for the work you guys are doing out in the world, both professionally and the the people you're touching in your podcast. And I know each of you in a way to know that it's the good that you do and the impact that you make is not limited to those two things. Like, you're out producing relationships of your own, and you're living a powerful life, and I acknowledge you in that, and I just want you to know that I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you, and appreciate everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next time.